So imagine you're stepping into this dimly lit, completely climate-controlled warehouse.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and sitting right in the center of the room is this absolute masterpiece of kinetic sculpture. But, and here's it's covered in decades of dust.
Oh, wow.
Right? The paint is faded to this dull chalk color, the leather seats are all cracked, and there's this visible layer of oxidized rust just kind of creeping along the fenders.
Sounds like it needs a lot of work.
Well, see, to most people, the immediate instinct is to go grab a bucket of soapy water and a belt sander.
Yeah, exactly. Just strip it down.
But the curator of this collection stops you and says, don't touch it. The dirt is the best part.
The dirt is the best part. I love that.
Right. So today we are looking at a $52 million garage that operates exactly on that principle. Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. We have a very special installment for you today.
We really do.
Yeah, we are broadcasting an episode of Under the Hood, which is a recurring Chesterton Radio series coming to you from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas.
A great spot to be.
Absolutely. And our mission with this series, for those of you who might be new, is to take the seemingly ordinary aspects of modern culture and examine them through the incredibly vibrant, often paradoxical lens of the early 20th century philosopher G.K. Chesterton.
Which is really just the perfect framework for what we are tackling today. I mean, Chesterton had this unique genius for taking things we take entirely for granted, right?
Well,
and he just turned them completely upside down so we could actually see them for the first time.
And the subject we are putting under the microscope today is highly unexpected. I mean, we aren't analyzing some dusty Victorian political movement or, a heavy theological text.
Oh, definitely not.
We are looking at a massive, grease-stained, exhaust fume-filled cultural phenomenon, which is Jay Leno's garage.
Yeah, it's quite the pivot.
It is. Based on the stack of sources we've compiled, we are exploring a collection of nearly 200 classic cars and I think 160 motorcycles housed out in Burbank, California.
And on the surface, pairing a British man of letters from the turn of the 20th century with a late-night American comedian's car collection, it seems entirely disconnected.
It really does. Like, what do those two things have in common?
Exactly. But as we comb through the material today, the overlap is actually staggering.
Yeah, it's wild. But we do need to set a firm boundary for you, the listener, right at the top here. We are not here to review a television show.
Right. This isn't a TV critique.
No, and we are not going to fawn over celebrity wealth, and we aren't going to rattle off horsepower statistics or, quarter-mile times just to sound knowledgeable.
Which is good, because I definitely don't know the quarter-mile time of a steam engine.
Right. Instead, we are asking a profound human question based on the evidence in these sources. Basically, why do millions of people, many of whom don't even own a garage, let alone a classic car, find such comfort and fascination in watching a guy in denim wrench on obsolete machines?
And that underlying question is really what drives our entire thesis today. Because this widespread cultural fascination, it reveals a deep, often completely unspoken modern hunger.
A hunger for what, exactly?
Well, it is a hunger for craftsmanship, for the physical stewardship of our history, for tradition, for wonder, and crucially, for the dignity of making things well.
Wow, yeah.
And G.K. Chesterton wrote extensively about these exact concepts. So when we watch a mechanic lovingly restore the valves on a 1906 steam engine, we were actually witnessing the physical manifestation of a spiritual need.
That is such a cool way to frame it. So whether you are a certified gearhead who spends every Saturday completely covered in motor oil, or someone who couldn't identify a spark plug if your life depended on it, stick with us.
Yes, please do.
The goal is that you will leave this deep dive with a completely renewed sense of wonder for the everyday mechanical objects that surround you all the time.
Because wonder is the absolute bedrock of everything Chesterton believed. And it really explains why that specific garage in Burbank captivates so many people.
But we should probably define what we mean by wonder, right?
Yeah, we have to understand what Chesterton meant by it. Because he didn't just mean, looking at a nice sunset and feeling good inside.
Right. It's not just a warm, fuzzy feeling.
No, he meant a radical shift in perspective.
Yeah, and in his book Orthodoxy, Chesterton sets up this beautiful, kind of hilarious analogy to explain this.
Oh, the yachtsman.
Yes, the yachtsman. He describes this fancy he has for writing a romance novel about an English yachtsman. And this guy sets sail, slightly miscalculates his navigational course.
Just slightly.
Just a bit. And he eventually lands on what he firmly believes is a completely undiscovered island in the South Seas.
Right. He lands on the beach, and he is just armed to the teeth.
Like he's ready for an ambush.
Totally. He's trying to communicate with the natives by using hand signs, fully prepared to plant the British flag on what he assumed is some barbaric temple.
But the punchline, which is so Chesterton, is that the barbaric temple is actually the pavilion at Brighton.
Yeah, he has discovered England.
He never actually left home. He just approached it from a completely different angle, through a fog, and saw it as if it were this strange, newly discovered land.
And Chesterton calls this man's error a most enviable mistake.
Yeah, because he asks what could possibly be more glorious than bracing yourself to discover New South Wales and realizing with a gush of happy tears that it is actually just Old South Wales.
It's brilliant. Chesterton is diagnosing what he considers the greatest problem for modern philosophers, which is how to be at once perfectly astonished at the world and yet perfectly at home in it.
Astonished and at home. That's a hard balance to strike.
We struggle with this constantly. I mean, think about the automobile.
Okay, yeah.
For you, for me, for the average commuter, the car is the most mundane and visible object in modern life.
Oh, absolutely. We see thousands of them a day.
Right. We sit in them while trapped in traffic. We complain about the price of gas. We stress about our insurance premiums. They're purely utilitarian boxes designed to move us from point A to point B.
They're essentially appliances. Like, we treat them the exact same way we treat a microwave or a washing machine. You really only notice it when it breaks.
Exactly that. But the atmosphere curated inside Jay Leno's garage, it strips away that appliance-like familiarity.
How so?
Well, when the sources describe him rolling out a 1909 Baker Electric, which, by the way, is noted as his wife Mavis's favorite car.
Oh, I loved that detail.
Yeah, or like a massive 1906 advanced steam traction engine, the automobile becomes astonishing again.
Right, because it doesn't look or act like a modern car at all.
No, you are looking at a car, something you are entirely at home with, but you are seeing it as a strange, miraculous, slightly terrifying invention.
It's the yachtsman landing in England again.
Precisely. By highlighting the bizarre avenues that early automotive engineering took, the show turns you into that English yachtsman. You are discovering the concept of the car all over again.
I totally see how that works. We've basically forgotten the magic of moving across the earth at high speeds without a horse.
We just expect it.
Right. And showing us a steam traction engine forces us to remember how absurd and magical the whole endeavor is in the first place.
Exactly.
But looking through the sources, it's not just the bizarre mechanics that draw people in, is it? There is a deeply human element here. Leno repeatedly mentions that he buys the story as much as he buys the machine.
Yeah, the machine is really merely the vessel for the narrative. Without the story, it is just a hunk of cold iron sitting in a room.
There is a specific anecdote in our research that illustrates this perfectly. So Leno gets a phone call from a 93-year-old man who goes by the nickname Pumpkin.
Great nickname.
Honestly incredible. And Pumpkin owns a 1967 Chrysler Imperial LeBaron. It's got dual air conditioning. It's just this massive boat of a car.
And Leno admits in the material that this isn't really his kind of car, right?
Right. It's not a rare sports car or some antique steam engine. But Pumpkin tells him, he can't drive anymore, his eyesight is going, and he really needs to sell it to someone who will appreciate it.
And so Leno buys it.
He does. But the transaction itself isn't the point of the story. It's the handover.
Yeah, because when Leno goes to pick it up, Pumpkin is just overflowing with pride.
He is. He tells Leno, step on the brakes. These cars stop good because I did those brakes myself before I put it in the garage.
He wants Leno to know he was a capable steward of this machine.
Exactly. He wants to pass on that legacy of care. But the mechanical reality was quite different, wasn't it?
Yeah, the brakes were entirely shot.
Completely gone. Leno notes that they had to completely rebuild the braking system. I mean, they had to pull every single piece off that car, tear the whole assembly apart, machine the drums, replace the lines.
But he deliberately chose not to tell Pumpkin that.
Right. When the old man called later and proudly asked about it, saying, we bled them and made sure, Leno just smiled through the phone and said, you did a good job because it stopped.
That is so telling. He bought the man's dignity. He preserved Pumpkin's self-image as a competent mechanic and a good provider for that car.
It's a great story, but I have to push back on this framing just a little bit because we do need to look at the scale of what we are discussing here.
Fair enough.
We are talking about a man whose vehicle collection is valued at roughly $52 million. He owns at least 181 cars and 160 motorcycles.
It's a massive amount of vehicles.
It really is. Our sources mention he has a 1994 McLaren F1 that he purchased for $800,000 back in the day, which is now worth upwards of $20 million.
Just astronomical numbers.
So isn't labeling this a preservation of stories just putting a philosophical spin on ultimate billionaire-level consumerism? I mean, to a normal person, this kind of just looks like hoarding.
Well, it is a vital criticism to raise. If we view this purely through an economic lens, yes, it is the hoarding of luxury assets.
Right.
But Chesterton offers us a different lens here, what he called the fairy tale view of reality.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So in a fairy tale, objects hold deep significance. Chesterton wrote that you cannot expect adventures in a land of anarchy, but you can expect any number of adventures if you go traveling in a land of authority and design.
Okay.
He famously said, "Here everything has a story tied to its tale."
But how does that separate a curated garage from just a rich guy's giant toy box?
It comes down to intention and utility. If you buy 100 modern, identical luxury cars simply to demonstrate your purchasing power, that is consumerism.
Because they're just status symbols.
Right, the objects are disposable. But if you curate a 1906 steam engine, a highly experimental 1963 Chrysler turbine car, and a mundane 1967 Imperial solely because it belonged to a man named Pumpkin, you're operating under a totally different motive.
You're saying it's not about accumulation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are not accumulating goods. You are preserving physical records of human endeavor. The garage functions less like a private driveway and much more like an anthropological museum.
Oh, I see.
The $52 million valuation is just an external market reality. But the internal logic of the collection is about maintaining the lineage of human thought that shaped that metal.
So the distinction is between hoarding gold because it sparkles and you want others to know you have it, versus an archivist preserving ancient tools because they tell us how our ancestors survived.
Precisely. The curator values the artifact for the intention forged into it, not its market price.
That makes a lot of sense.
Which leads us to a really fascinating aesthetic problem. Because if we are valuing the thought forged into the metal, how do we find beauty in the greasy, dirty mechanical guts of a car engine?
That is the perfect pivot, actually, because a lot of these machines are not conventionally pretty. A massive, heavy, oil-leaking engine block doesn't look like a painting.
No, it looks industrial.
It looks harsh. And this maps perfectly onto Chesterton's essay, A Defense of Skeletons.
Oh, this is one of my favorites. For listeners who haven't encountered this specific essay, it is one of Chesterton's most brilliant inversions of normal thinking.
And so what does he say?
He observes that modern people seem to have this abiding terror of the underlying structure of things.
Like the literal bones of things.
Right. And he uses the changing of the seasons as his primary example. He notices that when winter arrives and the leaves fall off the trees, people constantly apologize for the bare branches.
Yeah, they act as if the tree is naked and embarrassed. Like it's in a disgraceful state of undress and won't be decent again until spring covers it up with green leaves.
Yes. And Chesterton argues that by doing this, we completely ignore the intricate, beautiful, complex skeleton of the branches holding the tree together.
We just see it as a lack of leaves, not a structure of its own.
Exactly. And then he extends this to human biology. He points out that humanity has a horror of its own skeleton, viewing the skull and crossbones merely as this grim symbol of death.
Which is how we use it on poison bottles and pirate flags, right?
But Chesterton argues the skeleton isn't about death at all. It was the vital framework of a lively, workmanlike life. It represents all the pulleys creaking, all the structural wheels turning to allow a human to move and work.
It's the mechanics of life.
Yes. And he concludes that there is a generous, defiant ugliness in nature. And we can totally apply this to mechanics that is deeply religious and wholesome.
A generous, defiant ugliness. That phrase is just incredible.
It really is.
Let's apply that ugliness to the engineering of these old cars, specifically for those of you listening who aren't mechanical engineers.
I do.
Because the sources heavily feature a 1930 Duesenberg LeBaron barrel side.
Oh, an absolute titan of early American automotive engineering.
But the way Leno talks about it reveals the skeleton of the engineering process. He explains that engineers in the 1920s and 30s already knew the theoretical power of concepts like overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder, and hemispherical combustion chambers.
The math and the physics were totally understood.
But they couldn't just build it.
Right. And we need to explain why those concepts matter to understand the frustration of those engineers. Let's take the overhead cam, for example.
Okay, let's break it down.
In most standard engines of that era, the camshaft, which is the spinning rod that pushes the valves open to let air and fuel in and exhaust out, was located deep down inside the engine block.
Right, and to reach the valves at the top of the engine, it had to push long metal rods, which are called push rods, up and down.
Exactly. And that's a lot of moving mass. It's heavy, it vibrates,
Yeah.
and it fundamentally limits how fast the engine can spin.
Because of all that heavy metal thrashing around.
Yes. But an overhead cam eliminates all those push rods by placing the spinning camshaft right on top of the valves.
Which is way more direct.
It is far more efficient and allows for massive increases in power and speed. The engineers knew this. They wanted 4 valves per cylinder to let the engine breathe better, and they wanted Hemi heads for a cleaner, more powerful explosion.
But as you noted, knowing it theoretically and actually manufacturing it are two very different worlds.
Extremely different.
It's like an architect in the year 1800, right? Imagine drawing up perfect blueprints for a modern 100-story skyscraper, but only having access to pine wood and iron nails to build it.
That's a great analogy.
The theory is perfectly sound, but the material science just isn't there. And in the automotive world, the limitation was metallurgy.
The science of metals.
Exactly. The alloys available in the 1920s simply couldn't handle the intense heat, friction, and stress of an overhead cam running at high speeds.
If you cast a complex cylinder head with 4 valves per cylinder using early iron, it would just warp, crack, or completely melt under the stress.
And the machining tools also weren't precise enough to create the tight tolerances they required.
No. To achieve that level of engineering in 1930, you had to use the absolute finest, rarest, most expensive materials, and you had to hand machine everything with just painstaking labor.
Which is why the sources note a bare Duesenberg chassis, just the frame and engine, by the way. No body, no seats, cost $8,500 in 1930.
Which was an astronomical sum during the Great Depression. I mean, Leno compares the purchase of a Duesenberg back then to buying a modern Bugatti Veyron or a McLaren F1 today.
You were literally buying bleeding-edge aerospace-level technology.
And here is where Chesterton's perspective on progress is so vital. In his essays, he noted that modern people have a terrible habit of calling old things bad, simply because we have invented better things now.
Oh, that is so true.
He uses the example of a knife. He says an early, clumsy iron knife is still an absolute miracle compared to the Stone Age.
Right.
We shouldn't call it a bad knife just because it doesn't hold an edge like modern carbon steel. It is a brilliant knife that simply isn't good enough for us anymore.
And Leno shows that exact same respect to the mechanical skeleton of the 1930 Duesenberg.
He really does.
He doesn't look at it and say, well, the aerodynamics are terrible, and my modern Tesla would beat it in a drag race, so it's a bad car.
That would be missing the point entirely.
Completely. He marvels at it because it represents the absolute zenith of what human hands could forge with the metals and tools available at that precise moment in history. It is the skeleton of human progress laid completely bare.
It forces you to respect the struggle of the minds that built it. And, Chesterton had another wonderful image in that same essay on skeletons. He talks about the hippopotamus.
Oh, I love this part. He argues that the hippopotamus is perfectly designed, even though to human eyes it looks top-heavy, clumsy, and entirely grotesque.
Yes. He says that when you look at a hippo, you realize nature is as solemn and happy as a child scrawling strange shapes on a slate.
So you look at some of these early, massive, clunky machines like the Baker Electric, or especially the steam traction engines we talked about, and they're exactly like Chesterton's hippopotamus.
They really are.
By modern wind tunnel standards, they are aerodynamically grotesque. They are loud, heavy, and awkward, but they were perfectly engineered to solve the specific problems of their day, and there is this deep, babyish joy in their physical existence.
The joy of the mechanical hippopotamus. It is a fantastic way to look at industrial history. But realizing that these machines are complex, aging skeletons raises a very practical question.
What's that?
Well, skeletons crumble. Metal rusts. Rubber rots. Who is actually keeping these ancient skeletons alive? Who assumes the role of steward for all this history?
The sources provide a really striking comparison for this. Leno is discussing the people who scour the earth to save spare parts for a 1925 Doble steam car.
Yes.
And he compares these obsessive mechanics to the monks in the old days who used to save the Book of Hours.
The monks of the motor. It is a profound, almost religious image of preservation.
It is.
But to truly grasp the devotion required of these mechanics, we really have to unpack what a double steam car actually is and why it is so difficult to maintain.
We do need to clarify this because when I first saw the term steam car in the research, my brain just pictured a miniature train on rubber tires.
A lot of people think that.
Right. But the Doble is entirely different. The sources contrast it with the Stanley steamer, which was the more common steam car of the era.
Okay, yeah.
And with the Stanley steamer, the mechanics are pretty rudimentary. You are essentially lighting a giant kerosene fire under a 15-gallon kettle of water.
Very basic concept.
Right. You sit there and you wait for the water to boil and build up enough pressure to turn the wheels. It could take 30 minutes before you could even drive down the street.
It was incredibly slow to start, inefficient, and honestly somewhat dangerous if the boiler ran dry.
Definitely. But Abner Doble, the inventor of the Doble steam car, was a completely different breed of engineer.
He was an uncompromising perfectionist.
Yes, he didn't use a giant kettle. He invented a flash boiler.
And we should explain the mechanical difference there, because instead of heating a massive vat of water, a flash boiler uses a single, incredibly long coiled tube.
Okay.
The burner heats that coil to intense red-hot temperatures. So when you want steam, a pump forces a small amount of cold water directly into the red-hot coil.
And it just vaporizes immediately.
Exactly. The water instantly flashes into superheated steam, expanding exponentially in milliseconds.
Oh.
Because of this, a Doble could start ice cold from completely dead and generate massive driving power in a matter of seconds. It was a true technological marvel.
But there is a catch. The sources indicate that because Abner Doble was such a relentless tinkerer, he refused to ever finalize his design.
Which drove his investors crazy, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. When his investors would tell him, this model is perfect, let's freeze the design and put it into mass production, Doble would say, no, I just thought of a way to improve the burner, let me change it.
Which is an absolute nightmare for a manufacturing assembly line. But it is the dream of a true craftsman.
Totally. But as a direct result of his refusal to standardize, no two Doble steam cars are exactly alike. Every single one is a bespoke, slightly different prototype.
And the real tragedy of that brilliance is that today, out of all the cars he built, the sources estimate there are probably no more than 4 or 5 running Dobles left in the entire world.
4 or 5 in existence that actually operate. Think about how fragile that legacy is.
So how do they survive? This is where Leno's comparison to the monks comes into focus.
Right, because he mentions a network of deeply dedicated men. Like, he talks about a friend in New Zealand, a buddy in Long Beach, guys in England, and specifically a man named Jim Crank.
Yeah, whom Leno calls the global guru of the Doble.
Right. Jim Crank knows more about the thermodynamics and the bizarre valving of these specific cars than almost anyone else alive. These men are guarding the sacred texts of early engineering. They hoard the schematics, they save the brass fittings.
And if we pull Chesterton into this dynamic, we find one of his most powerful political and social concepts, the democracy of the dead.
Oh, explain that one.
Well, Chesterton argued that tradition isn't just about stubbornly doing things the old way for no reason. He said tradition is actually the extension of the franchise. It is giving a vote to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors.
I want to read the exact quote because it hits so hard. Chesterton wrote, "Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about."
It is a stunning rebuke of modern arrogance. We really tend to think that simply because we are alive today, we are inherently smarter than the people who lived 100 years ago.
But is there a danger there? Let me challenge that for a second.
Go ahead.
If we give too many votes to the dead, don't we get stuck? If everyone is obsessively preserving 1925 flash boilers, we never invent the lithium-ion battery. Doesn't worshiping the past inherently hold back the future?
That is the tension of progress, for sure. But Chesterton wasn't arguing that we shouldn't invent new things. He was arguing against the careless destruction of old things.
Okay, I see the distinction.
He believed that real progress requires an understanding of what you are progressing from. By dedicating their lives to keeping a complex steam system pressurized and running, Jim Crank and these mechanics aren't stopping the invention of electric cars.
Right, they aren't protesting modern factories.
Exactly. They are simply refusing to let our disposable plastic culture erase the painstaking intellectual labor of Abner Doble. They are giving his genius a vote in the modern world.
It is an incredible act of stewardship, and that level of stewardship creates a profound sense of trust within the community. There is a deeply touching story in the sources that illustrates this perfectly, actually.
Is this the DeLorean story?
Yes. It revolves around a 1981 DeLorean DMC-12.
Which is the iconic stainless steel car from Back to the Future, of course.
Exactly. Now, many people assume Leno owns one because it's so famous and he has everything. But he explicitly states in the material that he is not a DeLorean guy.
Interesting.
He says he was one of those young car enthusiasts who felt deeply disillusioned by John DeLorean's corporate scandals and the ultimate failure of the company. However, he does have a DeLorean prominently displayed in his garage.
Because it doesn't belong to him.
Right. It actually belongs to John DeLorean's brother. And when the brother delivered the car to the garage, he left a simple note inside it.
Oh, I remember this.
The note read, "When you're through exhibiting it, please give it to Jay Leno."
That is a staggering level of trust.
It really is. Leno says he was deeply moved by it. He didn't keep it. He ended up ensuring it was sent to Nebraska to be displayed at the Johnny Carson Museum, knowing Carson was an early investor in DeLorean.
But just think about the psychology behind that note.
Yeah, exactly.
A man is looking at his brother's complicated, perhaps tarnished legacy, this iconic piece of automotive history, and he trusts Jay Leno to be its ultimate steward. He isn't selling it for profit.
No, he wants to ensure the machine is cared for by someone who understands its soul and its historical weight.
And that kind of trust is only earned by someone who fundamentally respects the dignity of the machine, and by extension, respects the dignity of the labor that created it.
Which brings us to a fascinating paradox about Leno himself.
How so?
Well, how does a man who operates in the highest echelons of the Hollywood elite, possessing a collection worth tens of millions, maintain such a grounded, almost blue-collar respect for the common mechanic?
We really need to shift our focus to Leno's personal philosophy on work and life to understand this. The sources paint a very clear picture of how he views his own success.
He has a guiding principle, doesn't he?
Yes. He says, comedy is only funny when it comes from an everyman point of view.
That sounds incredibly Chestertonian.
It perfectly mirrors Chesterton's championing of the common man. And Leno explains how he maintains that everyman perspective despite his wealth.
Because during the day, he is in the garage, right?
Yeah, covered in grease, working with his hands. He talks about physically dropping a heavy transmission out of a car. He notes that if he were just a mechanic doing that transmission job, he'd maybe make $80 for the day's labor.
It's hard, physically demanding work.
Very hard. But instead, at night, he takes a shower, puts on a suit, stands on a stage, tells jokes for an hour, and as he bluntly puts it, people hand him bags with 20s in them.
He uses the friction of physical, mechanical labor during the day to prevent himself from becoming disconnected and arrogant at night.
Yes. The manual labor keeps him grounded in reality, so his comedy doesn't become the out-of-touch musings of a Hollywood millionaire.
And this duality aligns seamlessly with Chesterton's essay, A Defense of Nonsense.
It really does. Chesterton was deeply concerned with what the Industrial Revolution and the Victorian era did to the cultural perception of the common worker.
What did he think happened?
Well, he argued that in ancient times, the mass of people were seen as commonplace, but only comparatively commonplace next to royalty or kings. There was still dignity in their labor.
But the Victorian era changed that.
Drastically. Chesterton argued that the Victorian era introduced a toxic principle that conceived of ordinary working men as positively dingy and trivial. He said they were viewed as born in a black hat, inherently unpoetic and dull.
So just the idea that manual labor was somehow ignoble or beneath the cultured classes.
Precisely. And Chesterton hated that snobbery. He believed passionately that tradesmen should have a poetry of their own.
A poetry of their own, I like that.
He lamented the fact that society couldn't propose public dignity for modern working men without making the upper classes laugh mockingly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Chesterton argued that a grocer should have a magnificent coat of arms worthy of his strange merchandise brought from distant lands across the sea. He argued a plumber should have a patron saint. He wanted to elevate the cultural dignity of the person who works with their hands.
When you frame it like that, you could argue that Leno, using his massive platform in his garage, is effectively forging a modern coat of arms for the mechanic.
The evidence in the sources certainly points that way. How do you see him elevating the craft?
Well, look at his behavior at high-end car shows. These are usually incredibly stuffy, elitist events.
Lots of ascots and champagne.
Exactly. But the sources mention Leno actively championing the everyday enthusiast. He talks about seeing a family put a relatively common 2002 BMW on the exact same pristine show field as multi-million-dollar Bugatti Chirons, Duesenbergs, and exotic Ferraris.
Which is pretty unheard of.
Right. But the owners of the BMW were dressed in suits and ties, presenting their car with immense pride, and their parents were thrilled. Leno explicitly notes the cultural shift this represents. He says, "Now your parents don't have to cry if you want to be a mechanic anymore."
He is using his cultural capital to validate the profession.
He absolutely is. And he puts financial backing behind it, too. The sources highlight that he sponsors the Fred Duesenberg Scholarship at McPherson College.
Oh, I've heard of McPherson.
Yeah, it's unique because it offers a 4-year degree specifically in automobile restoration. He is actively ensuring that the art of the mechanic is treated with the exact same academic and cultural reverence as the fine arts.
Because he refers to automobiles as rolling sculpture, right?
He does. He argues they should be restored with the same care you would use to restore a painting by the old masters.
But we have to confront the elephant in the room here.
Uh-oh.
We are painting a very noble picture, but we cannot ignore the staggering wealth involved in all this.
I am so glad you brought that up, because I need to press hard on this paradox.
Let's do it.
Leno is phenomenally wealthy, and he isn't shy about it. In one of the interviews in our sources, he's discussing the heavy emotional burden of his wife Mavis's battle with Alzheimer's and dementia.
Right, which is incredibly sad.
It is. And he relies on his wealth to provide the best care possible. And he explicitly, unapologetically says, "They say money can't buy happiness. Yes, it can. Exhibit A, Exhibit B."
He's very blunt about it.
He firmly acknowledges that his money buys comfort, security, and the ability to pursue his passions without friction. So how on earth does this square with G.K. Chesterton?
Good question.
Chesterton was a famously staunch champion of the poor, the simple peasant, and the modest life. Doesn't Leno's immense $52 million accumulation of wealth completely contradict this entire everyman narrative we've been building?
It is a vital contradiction to explore, because on the surface it looks entirely hypocritical.
Yeah.
But the paradox resolves itself when you dig into the nuances of Chesterton's actual philosophy regarding money. Because Chesterton was not a Marxist. He was not intrinsically against wealth or private property.
What was he against them?
What Chesterton violently despised was the snobbery of wealth.
The attitude of the elite.
Yes. He hated the arrogant oligarchy of the rich, the belief that having money makes you a superior class of human being, exempt from the struggles of the common man. Leno, despite his wealth, actively rejects that snobbery.
How does he reject it in practice, though?
Look at how he runs his garage. In the sources, he talks about the dynamic of classic car restoration. He says the reason he loves working in his own shop is that there's only one asshole customer.
Yeah.
Well, it's just me.
Huh. That's a great line.
It's funny, but it reveals a deep truth. He hates the traditional dynamic where a demanding, wealthy, ignorant client mistreats and yells at the skilled laborer just because the client holds the checkbook.
Which happens all the time in luxury markets.
Exactly. Leno bypasses that entire toxic class dynamic by becoming his own customer. He deeply respects the labor because he is the one physically doing the labor alongside his mechanics. He isn't barking orders from a clean office. He's under the lift with a wrench.
So he is both the wealthy patron and the grease-covered plumber simultaneously.
Exactly. Furthermore, we have to look at how he deploys his wealth publicly. Chesterton strongly believed in civic responsibility and local charity.
Right.
The sources note that since 1985, Leno has served as the Grand Marshal for the Love Ride.
What's the Love Ride?
It's this massive motorcycle charity event that has raised nearly $14 million for causes like muscular dystrophy research, Autism Speaks, and 9/11 recovery efforts.
Oh, wow. That's significant.
He uses the wealth generated by his stage persona to fund causes that aid the vulnerable. And through it all, he remains surprisingly inoculated against Hollywood sycophancy.
That's true. The sources mention his attitude toward fame. He says he simply doesn't believe the good stuff or the bad stuff people write about him.
Which is very healthy.
If a critic says he's the greatest comic of his generation, he just says, "Thank you," and moves on. If someone says he's a terrible hack, he says, "Thank you," and moves on. He actively tries to live in the mechanical, real world rather than the ephemeral world of celebrity opinion.
Speaking of the real world of mechanics and industry, the sources provide a fascinating historical parallel to this idea of wealth serving the working man.
Oh, are you talking about the Marysville factory?
Yes. Leno enthusiastically recounts the story of an engineer who started a Chrysler factory in Marysville.
This is a brilliant historical footnote. The sources mention this engineer was a genius. Like, he invented the sealed beam headlight, which completely revolutionized night driving, and he was building cars with an overhead cam V8 engine way back in the 1920s.
But what Leno highlights isn't just the engine. It's how the man ran his factory town in Marysville.
Right. The source details that this engineer set up a radically benevolent system for his employees.
How did it work?
Well, if you worked in his factory, you were provided a house and you didn't pay any rent. If the economy dipped and you got laid off, the factory didn't evict you. You could continue to live in the house rent-free until things improved. Furthermore, the company provided health care for the workers.
And the source material specifically notes an interesting parallel here. Leno compares this 1920s factory structure to modern progressive social safety nets, casually referencing the Bernie Sanders thing.
And just to keep our focus strictly on the historical mechanics of what we are discussing, looking past modern partisan politics, the parallel is simply about the structure of prioritizing worker welfare over absolute maximum profit.
Right, it's about the system.
The engineer built a localized system that highly valued the dignity and security of the tradesman.
And historically, as the source points out, the system couldn't survive the brutal realities of the market.
No, it couldn't.
The engineer sold 12,000 cars, which was respectable, but when a severe economic recession hit, the immense overhead of providing free housing and healthcare caused the entire enterprise to implode into bankruptcy.
Yet, despite the financial failure of the company, Leno still heaps praise on the man. He calls him a nice man, a decent guy, and a brilliant engineer. He even states that automotive historians need to put a case together to get this engineer inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame if he isn't there already.
That is the crux of it. Leno respects the attempt to honor the dignity of the working man, regardless of whether the venture was a permanent financial success. He values the moral engineering as highly as the mechanical engineering.
It all circles back to a fundamental respect for the hands that build and maintain our world.
It really does.
Which naturally leads us to the physical, tactile process of restoration itself. When Leno acquires one of these crumbling historical artifacts, how does he treat it? What is his aesthetic philosophy?
This is where we see the philosophy of art directly applied to heavy machinery.
Let's talk about the concept of the barn find. In the materials, Leno explicitly states that his favorite expression in the automotive world is barn find.
It's a very evocative phrase.
He gives an example of an old Jaguar discovered in a New England barn that was built in 1680.
Just to clarify the timeline there, he means the barn was built in 1680, not the Jaguar.
Yeah. Yes, obviously. A 1680 wooden Jaguar would be a very different kind of engineering marvel.
Very different.
But the point is, the car has been sitting in this ancient, dusty structure for decades. It is covered in the evidence of time. When it comes to restoring these, what he calls kinetic artworks or rolling sculptures, Leno has a very specific preference for how the final product should look.
He vastly prefers to maintain the original patina.
He does. He explains that in the old days of car collecting, the standard practice was to grab a heavy-duty belt sander, strip off every millimeter of the old, cracked paint down to the bare metal, fill in the dents, and spray it with a glossy brand-new coat of modern paint.
You basically erased his history.
Completely. But now, he says, the goal is to preserve as much of that original aged finish as humanly possible. They intentionally keep the faded spots, the subtle rust, the physical wear on the steering wheel where a human hand rested for 50,000 miles. They refuse to erase the passage of time.
And if we examine this through Chesterton's critical eye, we find a beautiful parallel in his essay on toy theaters from the book Tremendous Trifles.
Toy theaters.
Yeah, Chesterton makes a profound argument about the nature of art itself. He states that art consists of limitation.
What does he mean by that? That art shouldn't be expansive?
He means that art does not consist in expanding things infinitely. It consists of cutting things down to frame them. He argues that the most bountiful part of every picture is the frame.
Oh, like looking at a vast, chaotic landscape, but only seeing it through a square window or a stone archway. The architectural constraint is what makes the view beautiful.
Exactly. The constraint provides meaning. For a classic car, the faded paint, the spiderweb cracks in the leather, the physical wear and tear, these are the limitations imposed upon the object by time, weather, and human history.
So the wear is the frame.
Yes. By not erasing that history with the belt sander, the modern restorer is actively embracing the limitation. The patina becomes the frame. It proves the car's authentic journey through the 20th century. It isn't a modern replica, it is a survivor.
I love that concept. But here is the brutal reality about restoration and maintenance. It is incredibly mind-numbingly repetitive.
Oh, it really is.
We are talking about endless hours of wrenching, bleeding brakes, cleaning carburetors, fixing timing belts, tightening bolts. It is monotonous labor. How is that joyful? How does a mechanic not lose their mind doing the exact same physical tasks over and over for decades?
The answer to that lies in one of Chesterton's most famous and frankly most uplifting philosophical concepts. It's found in orthodoxy and is the idea of the eternal revolution and the hidden joy of monotony.
Oh, this is the passage about the sun and the moon.
It is. Chesterton observes that we modern, sophisticated people have a very cynical view of repetition. We tend to think that if something repeats itself endlessly, it must be dead, like a piece of clockwork or a mindless machine.
Like it's just rote routine.
Right. But Chesterton argues that this is a projection of our own weakness. He says that variation is often simply caused by fatigue. A man changes his physical movements or changes his routine because he gets tired.
But a child doesn't get tired in the same way.
Exactly. Chesterton points out that children have abounding vitality. Because they have fierce energy, they want things repeated, unchanged. A child finds a simple game they love, like being tossed in the air, and they just yell, do it again, until the adult's arms are ready to fall off.
Which every parent knows all too well.
Yeah, the adult changes the game because they are exhausted. The child wants repetition because they are fiercely alive.
And then Chesterton applies this concept of infant vitality to the creation of the entire universe.
He does. He says, perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. Perhaps God has the eternal appetite of infancy. So every morning, God says to the sun, do it again. And every evening, he says to the moon, do it again.
That is just beautiful.
The repetition of the cosmos isn't the ticking of a dead clock. It is the enthusiastic repetition of a theatrical encore.
So when we pulled that grand cosmic idea back down into Leno's garage, his daily labor takes on a completely different light.
It really does.
When he takes apart a Holly carburetor for the 1,000th time in his life, it isn't the drudgery of a tired, bored man. It is the abundant vitality of someone who never gets tired of the mechanical ballet.
The mechanical ballet, I love that.
He is looking at the internal combustion process and saying, do it again. The maintenance isn't a chore, it is an encore.
It is an encore. There's a brilliant synthesis. And this joyful repetition feeds directly into a quote Leno shared in the sources, which we touched on briefly earlier. He said, the heart is healthiest when the head and the hands work together.
The head understanding the theory and the hands doing the repetitive labor. It becomes a healing process.
It is deeply restorative to the human spirit. Chesterton noted something very similar regarding the healing power of fully understanding what we possess. He wrote an essay about spraining his foot.
A very mundane injury.
Very mundane. But while he was hobbling around on one foot, he suddenly had a revelation about the absolute miracle of a working leg. He realized that the quickest way to truly love anything is to realize that it might be lost. We take our working limbs entirely for granted until they break.
You don't appreciate the engineering of your own foot until you are forced to stand like a stork for a week.
Exactly. And repairing a broken car functions the exact same way. It forces us to realize the miracle of a working one. When you spend 3 grueling weeks diagnosing and fixing the transmission valves on a 1925 Doble steam car, you become intimately physically aware of the miracle of servoward motion.
You just no longer take it for granted.
You really don't.
So let's take a step back and look at the massive landscape we've covered today. We started by asking a simple question. Why do millions of people find comfort in watching a guy in denim fix old cars?
And we've covered a lot of ground answering it.
By examining the evidence through the philosophy of G.K. Chesterton, we've uncovered something profound. A garage full of old cars isn't just a billionaire's toy box. It operates as a museum of human wonder.
Yes.
It is a physical testament to the dignity of the tradesman, supported by the modern monks of the motor who keep our mechanical history alive. It is the perfect, greasy example of Chesterton's belief in the romance of the ordinary and the profound joy of saying, do it again to the things we love.
It is finding the poetry in the plumbing. It is recognizing the soul inside the machine.
But, as we do on every deep dive, we cannot let you go without leaving you with a final, provocative thought to mull over on your own, something that builds on everything we've unpacked today but twists it just a little bit.
And in the final pages of the sources, Leno casually mentions another car in his massive collection, his 2015 Tesla Model S.
Right, and he praises it highly. He says he loves the car specifically because it requires absolutely zero maintenance. He notes that he had it for almost 7 years, it had never been back to a dealer, and there was no service done to it whatsoever. No oil changes, no spark plugs, no transmission fluid.
It is a marvel of modern efficiency.
Yeah.
But based on everything we have explored today, the value of the patina's limitation, the vital joy of repetitive maintenance, and the monk-like stewardship of the mechanic, we have to ask, does a maintenance-free world cost us something deeply human?
Oh, wow. That changes the whole paradigm.
If we manufacture a world where we never have to fix our machines, do we lose that intimate tactile stewardship? If we don't have to rebuild the brakes like Pumpkin did, do we lose our physical connection to the objects that sustain our daily lives? Does removing the struggle of maintenance also remove the romance of ownership?
That is a staggering question, because if the machine never breaks, we never experience Chesterton's sprained foot. We never realize the miracle of it working. We never get to be the restorer. We just revert to being passive consumers.
It is something for all of us to seriously consider the next time we turn the key or press the button to start our commute.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. It has been an absolute pleasure exploring this bizarre, beautiful intersection of philosophy and horsepower with you. We are signing off now. Remember, whether you are looking at a bare, skeleton-like winter tree, the complicated engine of a 1930 Duesenberg, or just the simple toaster sitting on your kitchen counter, keep looking under the hood of the modern world. Goodbye from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas.